Okay, so let us begin with a lesson video to get us into the mode of what this topic is about.
Birth and death are as contradictory as night and light. But they are strangely associated with an identical Hebrew word, kever. Kever means a tomb where a body is buried. But kever also means a womb where life is formed. A womb is a gateway to life, while a tomb is a gateway to afterlife. But is there an afterlife? Or does laying a body to rest in a grave mark the absolute end? If it were within our power to interview a soul, we would undoubtedly glean insight into afterlife. Instead, we have chosen to eavesdrop on a set of twins in their mother's womb to shed some light on the before life.
Hey, twin, I'm scared of birth.
Why?
It's the end of existence. We get ejected. We're finished.
I'm also anxious, twin, but I'm not scared. Birth is supposed to be a transition to the real life.
Huh. Don't give me the hiccups with your after-birth, real-life fantasies. How can life be supported without an umbilical cord and amniotic fluid?
Well, maybe it's a radically different form of life. Maybe we won't need the cord.
I wish you were right. I keep kicking that thing away from my neck.
Stop spinning for a minute and imagine, twin. After birth, we will enter a ginormous universe filled with light and with air that we will breathe through our mouths.
Come on, grow some brain cells, will you? Mouths are not for breathing. Besides, if your postnatal paradise existed, why has no one ever returned from that realm? Forget it. Once we leave here, we collapse into cold, dry nothingness and wither into eternal gloom.
I don't think Mother would allow that to happen. She nurtures us in this cozy womb. She sends us nutrients for months on end. For what purpose? Just to end it all with birth? No. Mother has greater plans for us than that.
Now you're beginning to sound infantile. Do you see a mother lurking in some corner of the womb? Not a trace. Show me a mother. And as for your nutrients, can't you feel that annoying cord? Don't exchange empirical for fantastical.
Thankfully, these two delightful infants made it safely to the other side. They grew up in the universe that one had described and the other had denied. And until today, they continue their clamorous debate. It is only that the topic of contention has slightly shifted from is there life after the womb to is there life after the tomb?
Cute video, no? So what the parable is trying to illustrate to us, that sometimes we speak about afterlife using terms of reality, the current state of reality that exists to us. So this reality is very real to us. And when we have a whole discussion about is there an afterlife and what does the soul experience in the afterlife, we use physical descriptions similar to how the twin was saying, mouths are not for breathing. We don't use mouths for breathing here. So how dare you suggest that maybe in the afterbirth, we're going to use our mouths to breathe? That's ridiculous. So we have to, so what we're going to present here in this class, our topic of heaven and hell, it's important to bear in mind that we're speaking about entire different reality. And that's borne out by we'll get into that in a moment. So we're born once from the womb, we're born again from the tomb. There once was a group of college students that came to the Rebbe in the 60s. The Rebbe, and they asked them what happens to the soul after death. some point in the discussion, the Rebbe said, I don't really like the term afterlife. It's convenient to use, but it implies that after life, there's non-life. The truth is, there's two forms of life. There's life in the body, and then there's afterlife in the body. You go to a different stage of life. Continue. There's a birth number one, birth number two. So, before we get into that, it's important for us to do some exercises to understand what we know about heaven and hell before we present what we present today and what questions we are interested in uncovering about this topic. So let's begin. We're on page 128, exercise 4.1, what I think I know about the Jewish view on afterlife, and the part two is what I would like to know about the Jewish view on afterlife. So take a moment to think about this or to write it down, because we're going to come back to this at the end of the lesson and see if we covered any ground. We made any movement, or did you know everything already? I suggest that 2 or 3 of the participants here today actually know everything I'm going to teach, and they don't even need to be here, but they're keeping me company, so I appreciate that. But there's actually a lot of new things that there is to learn too. Anyone want to jump in and suggest something that they, what's Jewish view on hell? Does anyone want to jump in and say, does hell exist? Who's going there? Are we going there? Is everyone going there? Is only non-believers going there? What about someone who's jealous? Does he go to hell? How does that work? Is it only our coworkers?
I don't think hell is like the way people understand hell. I like a cleansing. That you sit there and say, okay, you're in a washing machine, and then after that, because only God's eternal, not hate, not anger. So that's right.
Beautiful. So who's going there?
Everybody.
Everyone's going to hell.
I mean, not most.
What a positive, optimistic start of the class. Everyone's going to hell. Okay. Anyone want to agree or disagree with Keith? Who's going to hell? Or what is the purpose of hell? Or do Jews believe in hell? Okay, let's move on for now. The next exercise is, what enters your mind when you think of hell? Is it a hot place? Is it a cold place? Does it hurt? Is it painful?
Oh, again, I don't believe in the way other people believe in hell. Maybe you're just living through your past sins. I mean, is that painful? Maybe.
Okay, very good. So we're going to come back to this. Very good. Let's go on exercise. Let's do exercise on page 130 in the student book. And in this exercise, we're asked to rate the following according to the degree of pleasure they would provide you. So if you mark a 1, it's the least pleasurable. 10 means the most pleasurable. Happiness, is that a very pleasurable experience? And how pleasurable is it? What about a Hawaiian cruise, pre-pandemic, let's say, or post-pandemic? You know, what about a lifetime of meeting, social status? If you could fill in areas where you put it on the scale. I assume everything in here, definitely makes it above the 4. But the question is, where in the scale? Unless you despise money. If you despise wealth, then maybe it's a 1. Who knows? What about wisdom? Do you think ignorance is bliss? No. So wisdom just brings pain and suffering? No. So just mark on the scale what you think. And we're going to come back to this in a moment. Okay. So, what's important to understand is that as we explained in the previous lessons, the soul is eternal, the soul lives on. and the soul lives in a certain state after its life in the body, and that state is a reward and a punishment for actions that it did in this world. It's like the contractor the carpenter who worked his whole life, and he came to his boss. He said, I need to retire. I said, come on, stay for one more house. We have one more project to build. He says, I'm really done. I'm wiped. I'm old. I need to retire. So we have just one more house we need you to build. After a few more months building the last house, the GM gives him the keys. He says, that's our parting gift to you from the company. Right? So we create our states in heaven and hell. And so Judaism actually believes in reward and punishment. It's clear from the Torah. In fact, it's one of Maimonides' 13 principles of faith. As we read in text 1a, the 11th principle that a Jew must believe is that God, blessed be He, rewards those who observe the commandments of the Torah, and punishes those who transgress its prohibitions. Why is this so important to Jewish belief? In other words, if a Jew believes that penguins can fly, he may be a fool, but he's not a heretic. He's a fool. He's not a heretic. So why is it so important? What if a Jew says, I don't believe in reward and punishment? Why is he considered a heretic? Why do we just say he's just a fool? Why do we consider this belief such a fundamental belief? And the reason is because it demonstrates to us that God is very involved in our lives. He cares what we do and things matter. And the whole foundation of the Torah is that what you do matters and has significance. And part of that is that you'll get reward and punishment. Now, that concept can make us very queasy. Because, what do you mean? We're doing things for a reward. We're doing things for punishment. We should do it because it's the right thing to do. God wants it, so we do it. The fact that God is interested in what we do doesn't automatically relate that there has to be reward and punishment. Maybe God cares what we do, and there's no reward and punishment. Why is it a foundation? Before we answer this question, I know we're going to a lot of introductions and building, but we're building building blocks that are very important before we get into this topic of heaven and hell. And the first thing to remember is the Torah. If you look in the 5 books of Moses, all the rewards that are described are materialistic rewards. Yeah, God will stop your plants from growing. You won't have food. God will make your plants grow beautifully. You'll have many children. You'll have wealth. But as Maimonides writes in text 1b, the greatest reward is the pleasure of the world to come. The strongest punishment is to be cut off from the world to come. All the descriptions that the Torah is describing, that's not the real reward. Why does the Torah mention the materialistic rewards? Many different answers. We'll just suggest 2. Number 1 is because it works. Right. The animal soul is focused on short-term gains. The Torah is written. The written Torah is Hashav l'chol nefesh, is equal to all Jews alike. Versus theology. The theology is not really found in the written Torah. The theology of Judaism is found in the oral tradition because theology needs to be explained based on the circumstances of the recipient in its time. So what would have sounded to us extremely unjust 100 years ago, now today seems extremely just. And so context is very important when you're discussing the matters of theology versus the practical is above time and space, and therefore it's equal to all Jews in all times, and therefore it's found in the written Torah. You can find that in the appendix. Barbanel goes through that kind of explanation. That's what you don't really find, except for in the words of the prophets, in the 5 books of Moses, you don't really find so much theological discussion. Just look at the 10 Commandments. God says, I am God. He doesn't go into a whole explanation of, and there's no one else besides me, and it doesn't go theology. Very practical. Don't build statues, respect your parents, keep the Shabbos, don't kill, don't steal. He doesn't go into a whole theology of what it means not to steal and how a society has to live. It's just very practical because that's equal to us all. But Maimonides writes, that's not the real punishment is not, and reward is not in this world. As Maimonides writes elsewhere, these are more, God says, you do a mitzvah, I'm going to help you. I'm going to enable you to do more mitzvah. I'm going to give you more tools to do it. So if I see that you're a good steward of money, you give charity, I'll give you more money to give charity. But the goal is not, the main reward is not more money in this world. The greatest pleasure is in the afterworld. How do we see that? Take a look at the exercise that you just filled out on page 130. Look at which things you graded a higher degree of pleasure, and you'll notice that all the things that you wrote a higher degree of pleasure, at least I'm assuming, is things that are spiritual rewards. Spiritual things provide greater pleasure than materialistic things. And if that's true in our world, then it is definitely even more pleasurable things that are spiritual, that are not finite. All these things that we suggested here are finite experiences, happiness experienced by a human person, wisdom experienced by a limited mind. Compare that to the pleasure of a mind that is able to delve in infinite realms. The pleasure is very, very intense and real, and that is what the soul yearns for. So now, remember we gave that story of the contractor that got the house that he built for himself? That is the strongest foundation, what you have to remember. When we say that God rewards and punishes us, it's not that he wants to show us that the things we do are meaningful. See, he sets up punishment and rewards, just to show us how valuable the things that we're doing are. It's much deeper than that. We could have two scenarios. We could have scenario A, where a person works, he gets money, so he can have food. The fact that he was changing some numbers in the Excel sheets didn't make this food more real. He got paid on the side. But there's another scenario where a person sows, he reaps, and he has food. There's a direct correlation between the investment you put in and the result that you get out. It's not disjointed, unrelated. It's actually one and the same. So everything, if the carpenter built a beautiful floor, a straight floor, he now gets to live in a straight floor. It's not, the reward is a consequence of your actions. So that is very important building block that we have to remember when we're thinking about reward and punishment in the Torah. The Torah constantly has reward and punishment, but it's intrinsic. If you jump off a roof and you break a leg, it's not the doctor punishing you for not listening to his instructions, so he broke your leg. Right? When the doctor says you can't have candy, he's not being mean and say you can't have candy. And then because you didn't obey his rules, he's punishing you with cavities. That's not what's happening. So the same thing as when God gives us Torah and mitzvot, he's not petty and saying, oh, I'm a big God, and I want people to listen to me. And people that do my will, I'll give them prizes. People that don't listen to me and get me angry, I'll give them punishment so they listen to me next time. That's not at all what's happening. Let's read text 2. This is from a great Kabbalist, the Rekanti, who lived in the 1200s. He lived a short life. If we can get someone from the Zoom crowd. We're on page 134. Kenny, you want to read for us?
Okay, hi everyone. Do not consider do not consider the punishments described in the Torah as comparable to penalties a person incurs for disobeying the decree of a mortal king. Not at all. Rather, they are completely natural consequences. For one who fails to observe a Torah commandment and is denied the good that naturally results from its observance. It is comparable to one who fails to sow his field and therefore cannot reap a harvest, or one who fails to wear clothes and is then cold. It is as natural a consequence as the warmth provided by fire, the wetness of water, and the satiation of bread. In the same way, it is the nature of each mitzvah to provide the positive consequences that are promised for its observance, or the negative consequences that are stated regarding its transgression. But tshuva, tshuva changes all that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In other words, you could always repair damage that you've done to yourself, for sure. But the point is that the reward and punishment is intrinsic to what we're doing. It's not secondary. Jem produced a video last night where a dentist, he went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, maybe you should close your store on Shabbos. He said, that's when all my patients, everyone's working during the week, they all only have off on Shabbos.
Mm-hmm.
The Rebbe said, you have to recognize when the Torah gives you a commandment, it's not like, you can have a happy life, but the Torah has a burden to impose on you. It's actually, this will help your life in a tremendous way. Think, because not always does a lot of money bring happiness. Sometimes that money can be used for the wrong things. It's not about the quantity of money, it's about the quality of what that money is used for. And he closed down his dentist, and what do you know? All of a sudden, he closed down his dentist on Shabbos. He was moving to a new location anyways. He closed on Shabbos, and he still had an enormous amount of clients. He didn't lose any clients. He made a lot more money, and it was used a lot more way, and he just felt a lot of blessing in his life as a result of this very difficult decision. And that's how the Torah, so people used to ask the Rebbe for sigulot. What amulet should I wear, or different. The Rebbe said, keep Torah mitzvahs. That's easiest way to better your life, because what you sow is what you reap. And when the Torah says, for example, in the case of the clothing, if someone, when he comes, he says, should I put on a heavy coat or a small coat? And the Torah says, I want you to do it exactly like this. Oh, the Torah is so demanding. No, the Torah is demanding because that's the weather that's going to be. If the Torah says, don't put on a heavy coat, it's because it's going to be hot outside. You don't want to wear a heavy coat when it's hot outside. And the Torah says, put on a light coat, because it's going to be, put on a heavy coat because it's going to be cold outside. So the fact that the Torah constantly forces us to lead a very hard balancing act is because we're living in a real world where our actions have consequences, and God is trying to help us navigate the terrain of the always changing world.
But there's no contradiction to, of course, using your wealth for good, for mitzvot, but there's no contradiction to also using your wealth for beauty. And like is it important to have a 10,000 square foot house versus a 5,000?
These things could fall into rubric of a mitzvah, because as for example, beauty. It says the women of Egypt, the righteous woman, in their merits, the Jews were redeemed from Egypt because they used their beauty to build Jewish families, to have more children, which is mitzvah number 1 of the Torah. So to have a bigger house, and it could be a big mitzvah because it enhances the ability to observe mitzvah better. Your house has to be peaceful and serene in order to be a good Jew. So these things, if they fall under the category of a mitzvah, then it's well used. Money is not the root of all evil in Egypt. Right. Gold was created to build a tabernacle. Gold was created to make a beautiful home that hosts a lot of guests for Shabbat, that people feel welcome and people feel in a non-anxious mood. So they're able to study Torah with more peace of mind. So absolutely, we're not saying that everything has to be used for synagogue. Everything has to be used to help a Jew be the best Jew. Similar how Maimonides, he wrote a few chapters in his legal work about how a Jew has to be healthy, because a Jew needs to be healthy in order to serve God. So he says, don't eat too much, don't make sure to exercise, all the instructions he gives there. Let's look at text 3, famous saying from Ethics of Our Fathers. Sheskar mitzvah mitzvah, uskar avera avera. The reward of a mitzvah is a mitzvah, and the retribution for a sin is a sin. On the simple meaning, this text is saying, if you do a mitzvah, God makes it easier for you to do more mitzvah. If you give charity with your money, God gives you more money in order to be able to give more charity. If you sin, God makes life more difficult. Let's say you tell a lie. Now God creates it in a way that you have to tell another lie to cover up for the other lie that you tell, and it snowballs into, one big cover up because of the small little white lie that you told. So that's the simple meaning, but there's a much deeper meaning here. The word mitzvah means connection. The reward of doing a mitzvah is that now you're connected to God. That's the greatest reward. The reward of doing a mitzvah is you're connected. The reward of hurting God is you're disconnected. So when you make your spouse happy, is the reward now she'll treat you better? No. The reward is now you made your wife happy. That's the reward. The same thing when you have a close friend and you call him. Now the prize is that he's going to give you a birthday present? No, the prize is that now you're close to your friend. There's nothing more beautiful and powerful than an intimate relationship with a friend or a teacher or a spouse or your children. So the reward for doing things for your children, being there for your children, is that you were there for your children and now you're able to connect with them on a deeper level. So the same thing is everything in this world that we do. When we go to shul, we think, oh, God is going to reward us with something big because the sacrifices that I made to come to shul, those were big sacrifices. God owes me. True, but that's not the real. You're missing the punchline. The reason you go to shul is we get an opportunity to connect. And so you sacrifice in order to be able to connect. And now you got that connection. Now, sometimes we're blind to the connection. We say, how does putting on tefillin equal connection with God? How does paying my taxes honestly equal connection to God? So that's what happens in the world to come. We get exposed to how our mitzvah actually caused blessing or hurt to the relationship that we have with Hashem. Let's read text 4, which was the first explanation that we're going to read in our class of what hell is all about. He writes, the fires of Gehenna are stoked in direct proportion to the degree to which the wicked fan their fiery passions. That comes straight from the Zohar. You want a hot fire in hell? That's how passionate you were lusting after sins in this world. That's from the Zohar. So the Sfat Emet writes, accordingly, we must say that Gan Eden is amplified by the tremendous passion that the righteous invest in their Torah study and in their performance of God's commandments. They take great pleasure and delight in God himself, and their deeds generate a corresponding abundance of light in Gan Eden. When you do a mitzvah with passion, that creates an intense passion in the world to come. That directly results in a very deep pleasure in the world to come. We're going to skip this meditation that from Rabbi Shei's tab. We'll explain the concept. But she shows, how the engineering of a lever, the way it works, a fulcrum. You have a fulcrum point in a lever, and a small action here, a small pressure here, creates a lot of energy and force on the other side, right? A small movement in this world unleashes a tremendous amount in the world to come, which is something we learned about in lesson 1, that one moment of a whole life of bliss in this world is pale into comparison to a single second of bliss in the world to come. However, one action in this world is greater than the whole world to come. Because one action here, it's like you put your fingers in front of the lights. You create a massive giant on the screen. Your little fingers movements are creating massive structures in the higher realms. So that's how we look at every mitzvah that we do, and every mistake that we make also has massive consequences. But the good thing is that our mistakes have massive consequences, but one moment of teshuvah, one moment of repentance in this world is greater than any cleansing that can be done in the world to come. And that takes us right into the next segue of what Gehenna is all about. Gehenna is the Hebrew word for hell. And Jews like using the word Gehenna because hell has got so much baggage loaded onto that term. So many jokes about heaven and hell, and the devil with the pitchfork, and the angel directing, you're going to here, you're going to there. There's so much imagery loaded into the word hell. So Jews always use the word Gehenna. And what Gehenna is a soul catharsis. It's a time when the soul confronts its life. It's forced to confront everything that it did in this world. And now he's basically watching all the beauty he created, all the harmony he created in this world, all the connection points he made with God. And he's forced to confront all the hurts he created and all the disconnect that he created. And that experience is extremely painful, excruciating painful for the soul. But that excruciating pain that the soul experiences also leads to recovery. Sometimes an intervention, family gets together and they make an intervention. You're an addict, you're this, you're that. And at the beginning, the person's denial and tries to deny and hide and is ashamed and angry at the people who are trying to control him and everything. But then eventually, if they do get the help and the treatment, their life is a worlds apart and better than a life that they were leading, a dual life and trying to cover up the constant. So the same thing is for the soul. That in Jewish worldview, Gehenna is a soul catharsis. It's a time when the soul is forced to confront itself. And that painful experience of confronting itself is itself a cleansing for the soul. Let's read text 5. Pascal, do you want to read text 5 for us?
Yes, text 5. Okay, so Elisha ben Abuya was a former Mishnaic sage who turned to such public heresy and treachery that he was derogatively nicknamed Acher, something else. When Acher died, the heavenly court declared that we will not afflict him with judgment in Gehinnom, nor will we permit him to enter paradise. Their reasoning, we will not afflict him with judgment because he studied much Torah, but we will not permit him to enter paradise because he sinned egregiously. Acher's former disciple, Rabbi Meir, said, better that he indeed be judged and punished, so that he may then enter paradise.
So this character, his prior name was Elisha ben Abuya, a contemporary of Rabbi Akiva, one of the greatest sages of his time. There's a famous depiction of 4 sages entering the Pardes. One of them is Rabbi Akiva, and one of them is this character, Elisha ben Abuya. Rabbi Akiva goes into the orchard in peace and comes out in peace. But this character, he goes in as one of the greatest sages of Israel to ever live and comes out a great heretic, ends up joining the Romans and becomes a traitor to his people, causes the death of numerous Jewish children, and through this all, and everyone despised him and called him Acher, Reb Meir, his student, stayed loyal to him and continued learning from him, even after his heresy. And Elazar ben Avu continued teaching him ideology. He says, this is not what I believe in, but this is the information. And that's why Rebbe Meir, in Ethics of Our Father, he says an interesting statement. He says, don't judge a wine by its jar, but only what's in the contents of the jar, right? So he's saying, Acher, externally, his behavior is terrible, but there's always something good inside that you can benefit from, and he took that position. And yet, what does he wish on his teacher? He wishes on him hell. He says, please, let him go to hell. That way he can go to paradise. In other words, what do you want? Do you want him not to experience pain, but because of all the Torah that he learned? No. The Gehenna, the cleansing, is actually a good thing. It's not a comfortable thing. It's extremely painful. And Rameir promised that when he passes away, he's going to plead his case and beg that he should go to hell. So when someone tells you go to hell, in a way, you should thank them for that. In a way, they're helping your soul confront the damage that was done to the soul. And so all the descriptions throughout the Torah, you will hear descriptions, not in the written Torah, but in the oral teachings, a hell of fire, a hell of snow, hell of a slingshot, different soul pains that they're describing, that the soul will go into, and there's different, and there's swords, and there's this, and there's that. They're obviously not physical realities. They're descriptions of what kind of pain the soul experiences when he's forced to reckon with how close he is to God and how this damage he caused to the world and to himself. As we read in text 6, Bruce, do you want to read for us text 6? Okay. Keith, take it away. Text 6, page 139.
The purpose of Gehenna is to refine the soul and rid it of any sickness that it contracted. This is similar to the process of smelting silver, wherein the dross and sediment is burnt away in the furnace, leaving the soul clean and free of impurity. Similarly, for the soul to be able to experience the light of its eternal pleasures and bask in God's radiance, it must first be refined in the spiritual fire of Gehenna, whereby the negative is purged from the positive.
There once was a great rabbi, in the Talmudic times, and he wanted to study the Jerusalem Talmud. What was the problem? The problem was he was expert in the Babylonian Talmud. And he was worried that he's going to be learning the Jerusalem Talmud, which is a more sublime study. And he was worried that he's going to be always studying the Jerusalem Talmud on the Babylonian Talmud's terms. And he knew that Jerusalem Talmud has to be studied on a different term. So what did he do? He fasted for 40 days as a cleansing process to help him forget the Babylonian Talmud in order that he could now study the Jerusalem Talmud. What this story illustrates to us, and it's actually explicitly mentioned, is that when the soul is trying to get close to God, it kind of has to cleanse itself from its coarseness. And so as it's trying to get closer to God, the cleansing that's necessary is deeper. So between each stage, in a way, a cleansing is necessary. So this shows us that it's not a punishment at all. It's just a reality that as you move to higher worlds, what was considered a non-stain, on one level becomes a stain on a higher level. So the fact that someone gave charity, on one level, that's a mitzvah. The fact that he did it with an agenda. So on a lower reality, it's still a mitzvah. On a higher reality, now that becomes a stain. Then in a higher reality, he gave the mitzvah, he gave the charity for no agenda. But he let his ego get to him after he did the mitzvah. He felt good about it, and that led him to feel that he's morally better than everybody else. So that becomes a stain. So as you keep on moving deeper, the soul has to constantly be purified greater and greater.
So why go deeper?
What?
So why go
Because
deeper?
the deeper is the deeper is more it's close. It's real. You want the real. You want the pleasure. You want to get close. So either you can live like monotone, no pain, no reward. But Reb Meir was praying, no, it's worth it to go through this cleansing because it's a short-term pain that's going to benefit the soul so tremendously, because the soul is limited and it's trying to get close to an infinite God. And in order to do that, it has to grow, it has to mature. It has to lose the baby teeth. It first has the teeth, then lose the baby teeth, then get new teeth. It's a painful process. But this is part of growing up. Growing up, the growth spurt has a little pain, but the pain is not a punishment. The pain is an aid in enabling us to experience God in a deeper way. Let's read text 7, the way Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan describes hell. Again, if you could read first text 7 on page 139.
Me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Wow. 130. Okay, I'm sorry. Then an individual will also see himself in a new light. Even in our mortal physical state, looking at oneself can sometimes be pleasing and at other times very painful. Imagine standing naked before God with your memory wide open, completely transparent, without any jamming mechanism or reducing valve to diminish its force. You will remember everything you ever did. You will see it in the light of the unshaded spirit, or, if you will, in God's own light that shines from one end of creation to the other. The memory of every good deed and mitzvah will be the sublimest of pleasures, but your memory will also be open to all the things of which you are ashamed. They cannot be rationalized away or dismissed. You will be facing yourself, fully aware of the consequences of all your deeds. We all know the terrible shame and humiliation experienced when one is caught in the act of doing something wrong. Imagine being caught by one's own memory with no place to escape. A number of our great teachers, Yosef Albo Ikarim, Rabbi Manasseh ben Israel, Nishmas Chaim, write that the fire of Gehenna is actually the burning shame one experiences because of one's sins. Of course, these concepts, as used by our sages, may also contain deeper mysteries and meanings, but a major ingredient of this fire may be shame. How else could one characterize the agony of unconcealed shame upon a soul? We are taught in Talmud Ediot that the judgment of the wicked lasts 12 months. The pain eventually
subsides. So let's stop here before we go into that. Oh, the pain eventually subsides. Okay, so. So what we have here is that the soul goes through a cleansing process, right? And so we see, based on all this, how different the Jewish view on Gehenna and paradise is compared to Muslims think, or Christians think, or other religions think. So do you get 70 virgins in heaven? Where it's a spiritual space. Do you, if you're a non-believer, if you're a Jew who doesn't believe, is it eternal damnation? No, not at all. Like, this is a cleansing process. So every single Jew has a portion in the world to come. Every single Jew, as we read in text 9, each member of the Jewish people has a portion of the world to come. And as we read in text 8, the maximum time that a soul needs cleansing is 12 months. And that's why we say Kaddish for 11 months. Because no one wants to imply about their loved one that they needed the maximum good. Right? So every soul needs cleansing. The souls of the extremely righteous need cleansing because they were the leaders of sinners. So they get cleansing not for their own faults, but kind of for everybody else's. It's almost like the righteous on Yom Kippur that say, Al Chet, Al Chet. What sins did they do? But it's the collective but for most of us, we have our own issues to fix. And so we go through a cleansing process for a few months. The maximum sentence is 12 months. But as we know, sincere teshuvah, we can fix in one moment in this world more than hours and hours in Gehenna in the next world. Because here it's a lever. Little actions here have cosmic effects, massive effects to our soul, the world to come. So it says when Mashiach comes, our souls we're going to regret exile. What do you mean we're going to miss exile? What are we going to miss? We're going to miss this ability for small little actions to have these massive nuclear reactions. And that we get in this world, our small actions that we do today can do massive amounts of good for our soul. So we might think, I've done so much damage in my life, I've made so many mistakes. Good, so fix it. The fixing that you can do here is much greater than any fixing that your soul will do in the next world. So, there's a famous story in the Talmud of Rabbi Elazar ben Derdaya. He became a rabbi on the day he died. What's the story? Elazar made it his mission to sleep with every famous prostitute in the world. And he once found out that there was one star prostitute in some faraway place that charged a huge, enormous sum. And he raised the funds. And when he met that woman, the woman was like, "You're a lost cause. You're never going to be connected to your God." So that was like a soul catharsis for him. He wasn't. So he started searching and looking, and maybe he could find. And every rabbi he turned to, they're like, "You caused so much damage. How can you fix that? You're going to fix a lifetimes of sins in 1 week on one leg." So he took his head, he put it between his knees, and he started to cry. And he was in such pain and agony of feeling cut off and disconnected from God. And he cried and cried for many hours until his soul expired. And a heavenly voice came out and said, "Rabbi Eliezer ben Derdaya has a portion in the world to come." And the sages of Israel who heard the heavenly voice said, "Look at this. We're working 70 years to earn a portion in the world to come. What this person accomplished in 1 moment." Because 1 moment of sincere teshuvah could really change. It's 1 moment of sincerity. And you see, what did he fix? What did he fix? What did he do? He did nothing. But it's his state. He said, "God, I want to be connected. I can't imagine a reality when I'm disconnected from you. It's unbearable. I thought, okay, we're connected, but I'll do my own thing on the side. I have my own interests on the side." But when this prostitute told him, "No, you're disconnected," that feeling was so painful for him. He said, "No, I can't bear that." And when he made that resolution that I'm going to be totally connected to you and nothing else, that gave him a place in the world to come. So now let's go into paradise. We discussed a lot about hell. Now let's move on to paradise. The joke about the Jewish sisterhood that unfortunately when they got into their massive accident, their bus accident, so they came before the heavenly court. So this group, such a beautiful group, they're going straight to heaven. So the guard said, "Yeah, but there's a computer glitch. We can't do check-in in heaven. So maybe they could go to hell for 3 days until we get everything sorted out." So they go to hell. An hour later, the guy from downstairs calls upstairs, "Get them out of here right now." the sisterhood already started a fundraiser and they're installing air conditioning tomorrow. You know, so there's always these beautiful acts that we can do that to bring us a place in heaven. So remember how we were saying that sometimes you use physical descriptions to describe spiritual things, and people get stuck in the physical description. So there's a joke about when the cell phones were coming out. The guy says, "Honey, there's a new thing called wireless phones." Wireless phones? How do they work? He says, "I'll give you a metaphor. First, let me explain to you in the metaphor how wired phones work. So imagine you have this very big dog. The dog is so big that his tail is from one side of the city, his head is all the way on the other side of the city. When you shake the tail on this side, it starts barking all the ways on the other side. That's how wired phones work. Do you get it, honey?" She says, "Yeah, I get it. Now, could you get to the wireless part?" He's like, "Well, it's the same thing. Just imagine there's no dog." So sometimes the parable, you're giving a parable and you kind of destroyed the whole thing. So the same thing is, Torah gives, in the Talmud and the Medrash, it gives all these parables for the pain and the bliss that's experienced in paradise. But sometimes we kind of distort it and we miss the punchline of what it's all about. So when you read in text 10, spiritual reward is abstruse and difficult for mortal intellect to visualize and grasp, as long as the intellect remains attached to the corporeal body. Just as one who is blind cannot grasp the concept of colors, so the spirit that is engaged with corporeality cannot grasp purely spiritual matters. Okay? So we have to free ourselves. So when we do a mitzvah, we forge an intimate bond with God. Paradise is the experience of the depth of this relationship. When we study Torah, we're kind of building receptors for our neshama to be able to experience its connection with God. When we do a mitzvah, we're building special sunglasses or, UV ray protection for the soul to experience God in a comfortable way, without the soul having to, like Moshe jumped back in the beginning. And what does God tell Moses? In reward for you standing back, I'll allow you to come see me. What is he saying? Hold on. Moses didn't want to see God. So now God's saying, now you get to see me? He's saying, in reward for you recognizing the holiness that's here, I'm going to give you the garments that will be able to allow you to see me without making you cringe and recoil. So the same thing is every mitzvah that we do in this world gives us garments and clothing to be able to experience the depth of this relationship in the world to come. So as text 11 says in the Talmud, in the hereafter there is no eating, drinking, procreation, commerce, jealousy, hatred, or competition. Rather, the righteous is their heads adorned with crowns, and they delight in the radiance of the divine presence. Now, are we talking about physical crowns? It's not about the crown. It's about that now they have the ability to have a connection.
Rabbi,
Yes.
it says the righteous. Does it mean the tzaddikim of every generation, or it means all the souls after they underwent cleansing?
The second, the latter. As the verse says, Va'amich kulam tzaddikim.
Oh, okay.
The entire nation is righteous.
Oh, I see.
Sometimes you do damage, but once it's clean, so then you uncover that righteousness.
I see, but but I was reading, actually, there are different chambers in Gan Eden, and not all the souls are all together in the same place. Like,
Correct.
they're, right?
Because that's based on the garment.
Can you tell us about that division of souls, that separation of different souls?
So there's two elements here, and I don't want to go too deep into them, but the first element is you build for yourself your house. You build for yourself the house you're going to sit in. In other words, you built for yourself the clothing and the armor that's going to allow you to experience the depth of your relationship with God. So that's the chamber that you sit in, is what kind of house you built for yourself. So you sit in that chamber. On a deeper level, every soul has its viewpoint of how it relates to the infinite. Because souls are finite. They are finite creations. And they have a different, every soul relates to God on a different level. And that's even before they did any Torah and mitzvah. And that exists even after they do Torah and mitzvah. Abraham and Yitzchak are in different chambers because they express different, not necessarily, actually I don't want to say that about Abraham and Yitzchak, but in general, even righteous people that were equally righteous, they still have a different vantage point of how they connect to God. So half of it is nature, half of it is nurture. Which place your soul will reside in has to do with nature. If you're a priest, this or that, every soul has, there's maybe tribal places for soul. So some of it has to do with nature, but a lot of it has to do with nurture, with what you developed, the mitzvah, the Torah that you did during this life.
So, Rabbi, I have another question. It doesn't sound like, let's say you take one family, all the souls of that family are not going to be necessarily together in Gan Eden, because some souls have other madriga than others, have another, a different madriga. So it sounds like the souls are more sitting in different chambers of Gan Eden in relationship with Hashem, rather than in relationship with the people they were living in Olam Haba, in Olam Hazeh.
So that's partially true, because at the end of the day, the soul of your family members, in a way you're considered like one soul to a degree. You're not really one soul, you're obviously separate souls, but you share. And so let's say one brother does a mitzvah, that automatically impacts the sister, even though the sister's on the other side of the world. You say, what's the connection? They don't see each other. But since there's a kindred spirit between these souls, so they do play off each other, feed off each other, and therefore their places are very closely aligned. And we also have to remember that in the spiritual realms, there's a much greater unity between the souls, and therefore the experience of one soul is connected to the experience of all the other souls. So the souls are not the same, they're not one, they're each experiencing it in a very independent way from the others, but at the same time, they're very much interconnected to all the other souls. Similar
How about a man who had several wives? And after they all die, they are all together in the same chamber, the several wives, and that, King Shlomo HaMelech, he had over 900 wives. I mean, is he sitting in a chamber with 900 something wives? Soul? I mean,
let me ask you, do you here's a very important question. Do you think souls have a gender?
No.
Have a gender?
No.
It's a good question, but save it for next week, because your question is going to get even stronger. We're going to discuss reincarnation next week. So save it for next week, and we'll try to shed light on that next week. Okay. So now, you say, okay, beautiful. In the beginning of this course, we promised that these topics we're not going to just focus on things for curiosity's sake. It has to provide real tangible benefit. So what's the benefit of us knowing all this information about heaven and hell? It's in the afterlife. It has nothing to do with us. But first of all, as we said, one mitzvah and tshuva that you do in this world impacts. So it's very important to know this concept of heaven and hell, because it directly motivates you to make every minute count, to do what's important, and to remember that if you feel like you did a lot of damage, seize the moment and do teshuvah. So that's on one level. On a psychological level, research has shown that oftentimes close relatives suffer depression or PTSD, traumatic trauma,
Right.
and if they are exposed to these ideas of the soul's afterlife, it directly enhances and eases the pain that they go through, that they won't experience trauma and PTSD just from being aware of these concepts. They did a study in 2007 where they reviewed 32 scientific studies published about the effects of knowledge of the afterlife, how it affects, is it positive or negative? 22 studies, and that's I'm looking at the graph on page 144. 22 studies reported positive effects of spiritual beliefs on bereavement. 6 reported limited positive effects. 2 reported no positive effects, and 1 study reported some negative effects. Right? For example, if you fear, and I think that last report that reported some negative effects has to do, if you have the wrong beliefs, then you'll have negative effects. For example, if you say someone who was a non-believer has an internal damnation, that's a very traumatic experience. Not only did you lose your loved one, but now they're in pain forever. So I think if you have a healthy Jewish perspective on heaven and hell, which applies to Gentiles as well. Gentiles also, in a way, experience not the same, but a similar kind of experience where their soul reverts to its primal state, and sometimes it needs cleansing, sometimes it doesn't. And okay, so now
I saw that actually the goyim had only a nefesh and not really a neshama, and I saw that they did not go through that process of unless they're righteous Gentiles, which is not everyone in the Gentile world. But I saw that they actually, most of the Gentile souls do not go to Gan Eden and do not go through that process we're going to, a Jewish soul goes to. Is that true?
that's true. That's true. Although with a bunch of caveats that you hinted to, but yeah, they're not experiencing the same experience that the Jewish soul goes through, because their soul is more connected to the world, and our soul is more connected to God, more transcendent than the world. Yeah. Now, there's another benefit. So besides for the fact that we could change our own life and do teshuvah, besides for the fact that the people that are mourning can now feel more comforted by the spiritual belief of the afterlife and that their loved one is in a good place or on the way to a good place. So besides for all that, there's also something very important to remember, and that is that the living who are close to the departed can do things in this world to help the departed. It's not as if the departed, and now what is, and it's stuck to the home it built. Those that are connected can still contribute to the ascent of the soul based on our deeds. As we read in text 12, let's get a volunteer for text 12. Keith.
When individuals act righteously and are outstanding in the service of their Creator, they generate tremendous merit for the souls of their parents. This merit is simply by virtue of their parents having served as the instruments of their birth. It is the parents who enable their soul to be born into this world, which in turn enable the many righteous deeds that they perform. The parents, therefore, have a share in their meritorious acts. However, anyone's charity or prayers on behalf of a departed person are beneficial for the soul of the deceased. It is therefore a Jewish custom to give charity and do other good deeds on behalf of the deceased in order to cause satisfaction to the soul.
Very good. So the way it works is in paradise is it's not as if the soul is in its chamber and is stuck there forever. It's constantly growing and deepening its relationship, but it's in a very linear path. In this world, you can make leaps in both directions, down and up. In the next world, it's very linear. It's a very slow maturation that the soul goes through and gets closer and closer to God and progresses. On the yard site of the soul, it does make a quantum leap. Every yard site, a soul makes a quantum leap. But it's still a linear quantum leap because it was expected that when the yard site comes, it's going to make this big leap to another stage. And every year that intensifies, and it gets greater and greater as the yard sites accumulate. The quantum leaps become a snowball effect. They get even greater and exponential, but they're still, you could plot it out almost. Okay, it's going to make a quantum leap here, 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 here. But our actions in this world actually have an effect. So if you're a child, you don't even have to have in mind your parents. It's automatic because they were the ones who bore you and enabled you to do mitzvahs in this world. They automatically get credit for that. Now, what about someone who's not our parents and we want to contribute to their heavenly well-being? We can do a mitzvah in their honor. And when we do a mitzvah in their honor, we help them ascend. And that's why we say Kaddish. One of the reasons we say Kaddish is to help the soul ascend. There's a story brought in the appendix. And again, you have to remember that we're using euphemisms. But it says Rabbi Akiva saw a man, in the Zohar it says it was in a dream. However he saw a man naked, covered in suits, carrying heavy lumber, working really hard. And Rabbi Akiva said, "Where are you going?" He said, "My masters are making me do this." And Rabbi Akiva said, "Are you a slave? Are you I'll free you, I'll pay for your ransom." Eventually he discovered that this person was someone from the afterlife going through hell. So he said, "Do you have a wife?" He said, I had a wife, but she was just as wicked as me. Do you have children? She was pregnant. I have no clue if she had a child. So Rabbi Akiva found out who this person was. He asked him, "Where's your name? Where do you come from?" He went to that city, found the wife, asked about the wife. He said, "Oh, she's a witch." He said, "Do you know about her child?" "Oh, he's an uncircumcised lad. No one wants to circumcise and have anything to do with him." And Rabbi Akiva took him in, gave him a bris, and then tried to study Torah with him. No avail, nothing was going in. But through prayer and charity, he merited that he was able to help the child. And this man came to him later and said, "May God reward you with paradise for letting me, for easing my prerogative." Because the work that is set, what we do in this world, automatically enhances our path. And that's part of the thinking of Kaddish. That in Kaddish, many people think it's a prayer about death or about souls. But you look at the Kaddish, it has nothing to do with death and souls. Let's read the translation on text 13 of the Kaddish. "Exalted and hallowed be his great name throughout the world which he has created according to his will. May he establish his kingship, bring forth his redemption, and hasten the coming of his Mashiach. Amen. In your lifetime and in your days, and in the lifetime of the entire house of Israel, speedily and soon, and say Amen. May his great name be blessed forever and to all eternity." It goes on. It's one big prayer of blessing to God. And that is the merit. When your children are blessing God, you receive, the soul yearns to be able to say a blessing. It's almost similar to every morning in the morning prayers, we say, "Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh," holy, holy, and holy. And then we read in the introduction to that prayer that all the angels are waiting. When will the Jews down on earth say Kaddish, Kaddish, Kaddish? Because then they will be able to say Kaddish, Kaddish, Kaddish. So all the angels are waiting. We want to praise God, but let's wait. We're waiting for the Jews to do it first, because a Jew in this world could accomplish so much more. So when we make God's name great in this world, we bring enormous benefit to our loved ones, and the same as if we do it in the merit of somebody else. So there are organizations that help for this, the people that don't have a loved one to say Kaddish. or they're not able to make it to services every day in the 11 months after the death. So you give $180, and when they're saying Kaddish, they have in mind the name of the deceased. So that's the help. So let's discuss for a moment yard sites, the customs of yard sites. So the progeny are essentially connected, and this was, Pascal, what I was hinting to when you asked about relatives. Are they in a similar place? And the answer is yes, they're soul connected. So when one soul does a mitzvah, since their souls are connected, it helps somewhere else. It's similar to women don't put on tefillin. They don't put on tefillin for two reasons. Number one, they have the spiritual, their neshama doesn't need the tefillin. Their neshama already has that connection to God, sans tefillin. The male needs to put on tefillin in order to get that connection. But an additional point is that when the male puts on tefillin, it helps the female. It's like the females putting on tefillin because the souls are connected. So they don't both need to do it. One soul does it for the other. The same thing is with candle lighting. The woman does the candle lighting, and that helps the man, even if the man is on the other side of the world. Now, when others do a mitzvah, it has to be meditated if they want to serve as a credit to a specific soul. So, when is auspicious time? So the first 12 months after the passing is a very auspicious time to do things in the merit of a deceased soul. And additionally, on the yard site, when the soul makes its quantum leaps, it could always use additional help. It's like, a small help could really make that quantum leap go a tremendous distance. And as well as during Yizkor times, when we do charity or mitzvah during Yizkor, which is like Yom Kippur, Shmini Atzeret, Passover, and Shavuot, these are also auspicious times to do things in the merit of deceased. And the way we do Yizkor is we light a candle for 24 hours. We do the same on the yard site. If we look in the student book on page 4.3, it goes through a list of customs that we do on a yard site. So we light a candle, a 24-hour candle, which there's a lot of mystical meaning behind it. The simple meaning is that like a flame that is always looking upward, is always jumping upward, our soul is always jumping upward. We also recite Kaddish during all the day's prayers if possible. If possible, lead the congregational prayers. So we try to say Kaddish on the day of the yard site and even lead the prayers if we can. We also visit the grave and recite chapters of Psalms. There's an interesting custom changed. About 300 years ago, the custom was on the day of the yard site you fast. And now the custom is to actually mark it with a celebration. We make a gathering and everyone says L'chaim, because they're each two different paths for bringing merit to the soul. One is by cleansing yourself, you bring merit to the soul. But there's another way to bring merit to the soul, which is making a blessing on a Danish and saying, wishing L'chaim. That has another way. And now, as we're living in darker times, we don't mean darker that the world is not hopeful. We mean God is less present and the generations are diminishing. We need to do everything to be joyful all the time. So we minimize the fasting and we focus more on joyful activities. We donate to charity. We study Torah, especially which part of Torah? Mishnah. The study of Mishnah is very appropriate because Mishnah, the 4 Hebrew letters that make up the word Mishnah, Mem, Shin, Nun, and Hey is Neshama. Very good. Is the soul. So these are very powerful purifying agents for the soul is when we recite Mishnah in this world. We also sponsor a Kaddish or Farbrengen. We make blessings. And we also try to learn from the acts from the loved one. What was the loved one good at? What beautiful things did they contribute? And we try to do that. So now here's the question. Imagine someone who wasn't a believer in this world. A sinner. He's a sinner in this world. And he goes up to heaven. when we say Kaddish for them, it's like, why are we saying Kaddish? He didn't even believe in Kaddish. But based on everything we presented here, when the soul goes up to heaven, it's confronted, and now it sees the truth, and now it wants to say Kaddish, but it can't. And feel it. That's the pain that it's experiencing when it's recognizing, I can't say Kaddish anymore. It could do it in a spiritual way. It can't really do it in a physical world. And so when we say Kaddish, we're directly helping the soul feel less ashamed. It's like, oh, actually, me being in this world led to other people saying Kaddish for me. So it's not like the end of the road. It's not the end of the road, because my loved ones that live on can help me continue the journey. So the Kaddish, to summarize, is a proclamation of God's greatness and holiness. Its recital lifts the soul, and as God's name is exalted in the name of the deceased, that brings credit to the soul. Now, what is very important, and let me just read, let's read one paragraph. We're going to read a teaching from Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz. He passed away within the past year. So us studying this teaching in this world will bring an elevation to his soul in heaven. So I'm skipping to the second paragraph, the middle paragraph. With this perspective, we can understand why reciting the Kaddish elevates the soul of the deceased. The aggregate of a person's actions and accomplishments in this world define his or her life. However, the tally of a person's achievements does not necessarily conclude at the moment of death. A complete evaluation of a person's accomplishments must also include all that is accomplished as a result of this person's inspiration and action. Therefore, when those who remain alive, and especially the person's children and descendants, whose very existence is a credit to their forebears, do mitzvot, do good deeds, they contribute to the deceased's balance of accomplishments. For although the deceased is no longer active in the world, his or her actions continue to inspire positive deeds and actions. So, is Kaddish the ultimate thing we can do for our loved ones? No. The ultimate things we can do for our loved ones is Torah mitzvot. Practical, action-packed. Because at the end of the day, even though the soul cannot recite Kaddish, it is able to yell out on the top of its lungs, spiritual lungs, God is great. And that's it the soul is doing all day. What do you think the soul is doing? He's learning Torah. He's screaming God is great. The one thing he cannot do, the one thing she cannot do, is like Shabbat candles, is give charity. The practical mitzvahs are the mitzvahs that the soul is completely cut off. And those are the kind of mitzvahs that are the most important that we do in this world. So even more important than Kaddish. There once was a rabbi, a Chabad rabbi, who he said, I teach in some forsaken city in Israel. There's no minyan to say Kaddish here. If I travel to shul to say Kaddish, I won't be able to teach these children Aleph Beis. So he wrote a letter to the Rebbe. He said, I think I have to stop my job for the year in order to move to a city where I'll be able to say Kaddish for my father for 11 months. He deserves a Kaddish. And the Rebbe said, more greater than the Kaddish you'll say in the city is teaching these children Torah in the city away from the minyan. So we're not trying to minimize the importance of Kaddish. We're saying Kaddish is extremely great, and doing practical mitzvahs in the person's honor is even greater. So we have to always keep that in mind to be investing in actual mitzvahs. Let's save the questions to the end because there's one more punchline I want to squeeze in that is so important. Now, till now we were explaining, we kind of were almost framing it as in, the soul has experienced God's radiant light. And we should do mitzvahs in order to create a beautiful home for ourselves in the world to come. And the more mitzvahs we'll do, the greater the bliss we'll experience. And it's very important not to get stuck there and to think that that's why we do mitzvahs. Do we do mitzvahs in order to create a home for ourselves? We are doing it. And should we only do mitzvahs because of bring our forebears greater places in heaven? If you get stuck there, you're kind of missing the whole point. Let's read text 15 from Eliyahu of Vilna, the Vilna guide. He writes, the primary reward in the hereafter is the soul returning to its source and uniting with God. Certainly, however, it is even greater when the soul connects with God here in this world through the study of Torah and the performance of mitzvot, for that is the purpose of creation. Don't get lost in, I'm doing mitzvot here in order to make a blissful world for me up there. No, you're doing a mitzvah here because this is where it's at. This is the prime stage of life, is here, and this is where you built the strongest bonds with God, happens in this world, and this should be your main agenda. Your main agenda shouldn't be, let me do a mitzvah so I'll have a comfortable place to sit in the world to come. I'll be able to connect with God in a deeper place. You should do a mitzvah because you're doing a mitzvah. You're doing a mitzvah, you're connecting with God. And there's nothing better than that. As the Alter Rebbe, as the third Chabad Rebbe writes, when our master and teacher, he's referring to his grandfather, the first Chabad Rebbe, would enter a state of spiritual ecstasy, he would be heard exclaiming, I want nothing at all. I don't want your paradise. I don't want your world to come. I want nothing but you alone. What is he saying? What is paradise? Isn't paradise where you get to experience God straight? What is he saying? I don't want paradise. I don't want the world to come. I want nothing but you alone. So there's a metaphor of a king who said, I'm making an open house. Whoever wants to come to the palace has 24 hours, they can come to the palace. And throngs of people came, and they were so overwhelmed and wowed at the beauty of the palace, at the beautiful sounds of the orchestra, at the exquisite food. And at the end of 24 hours, everyone says, okay, now you have to go. And there was only one 12-year-old boy who was able to stay focused. It's not about the fancy food. It's not about the marble. I'm here to see the king. And he went to the king directly. Everyone else got so caught up in the noise that they didn't make it to the main event. And the same thing, the first Chabad Rebbe was saying, I don't want paradise. Paradise is a beautiful thing. And it illustrates the beauty of God and helps me connect to God. But at the end of the day, it's the revelation of God. It's not connecting to the essence of God. It's connecting to a manifestation of God's revelation. I don't want to connect to God for his revelation. I want to connect to God himself or herself, God's self. And how do you do that? When we do a mitzvah in this world, you're connecting to God in a very direct way, in a very essential way. And that could mainly be done with a physical mitzvah. So when Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof turns to Golda and says, do you love me? And she says, what do you mean? Because Tevye, all his children are, romantically involved. He's like, I don't have this romance. I'm missing all the romance. So Golda's like, I cooked, I cleaned, I did this for 25 years. If that's not love, what is love, right? What's the punchline? What is she saying? You're getting caught up in the fluff when what you have is more than all of that. You have me. More than all the romance and the love and everything, that's all distractions from the main event. What's the main event is you have me. And so that's what the Alter Rebbe is trying to say. Don't get caught up in all the beautiful distractions. And what are the beautiful distractions? Is how nice will my paradise be? How close will I be able to see God? And so whenever we have a mitzvah, we can have two mitzvahs. One mitzvah makes us feel really connected to God. But one mitzvah is more important. So for example, you could be sitting by the Rebbe's Farbrengen. It's a mitzvah. You're hearing words of Torah. It makes you feel very connected. Or you could be helping a new mother that has no food in the house and there's no heat in the house. Which mitzvah should you do? You have to do the mitzvah that's more important, not the mitzvah that makes you feel better. Now, sometimes in the big picture, you have to study Torah, you have to go to Farbrengen, you have to get yourself motivated, but don't get caught and make that the primary. The primary is doing the mitzvah in this world, and that one will bring you an essential connection to God, and that's the most important thing. So to summarize, heaven and hell is a consequence of our reaction, and we can mitigate the hell by doing teshuvah. We can mitigate the hell of our loved ones by doing mitzvahs in their honor. We do that by saying Kaddish, but primarily by focusing on doing practical mitzvahs. But our main agenda shouldn't be on getting a place in the world to come. Our main agenda should be on connecting to God one-on-one. And we're going to conclude with a summary video.
Lesson 4. Where we go. 1. God's rewards and punishments are natural consequences of our actions. 2. When we do mitzvot, we forge an intimate relationship with God. In the afterlife, our souls experience the effects of our actions, our relationship with God. This is the greatest possible pleasure, and is also known as paradise, Gan Eden. 3. At times, a soul cannot enter paradise immediately, for its inappropriate actions in this world diminished its capacity to experience spiritual pleasures. Gehinnom, a painful yet cleansing process, is temporary. Every soul ultimately reaches paradise. 4. In Gan Eden, the soul constantly ascends to higher levels. Good deeds performed in a person's memory, including the recital of Kaddish, elevate the soul to higher levels that it cannot attain on its own. 5. What we do here and now is more important than the pleasures or pain of the afterlife. Living in order to receive rewards in the next world, or to avoid heavenly punishment, distracts our focus from where it belongs, increasing goodness and godliness in this world.
Hey, everyone, a Shavua Tov. I hope you'll join us for next lesson, lesson 5, where we go again, a topic about reincarnation. So while I suspect that some of you already knew a lot of what we discussed in this lesson, but next lesson, I've learned a lot of new things. And so I invite you to join us next week or this Wednesday for lesson 5. I also invite you to visit myjli.com/soul if you want to see that cute video that we watched in the beginning and you want to share with friends. So you can find it there. There's also the PowerPoint. There's also many more articles and videos related to today's topic. myjli.com/soul. Shavua Tov. I'm going to stick around a few minutes in case you have any questions. By the way, Pascal.
Viva, yeah.
Yeah, Viva, I wanted to mention that I know you're asking about the soul's compartments. Within the soul itself, the Ruach goes to the lower Gan Eden, and the Neshama goes to the higher Gan Eden. There's the Gan Eden HaTachton and Gan Eden Elyon. So each part of the soul also experiences God from a different dimension, so to speak. And so it's not just different souls experience God differently, but different levels of the soul also go to different levels of paradise. And I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi. It was great.
You know, my question, I would have just one question. Abai, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Okay, I was just have one question. You know, why Hashem did not create perfect souls to start with? He wanted to create a world. He had the desire for it, fine. But why did he create souls that are dysfunctional? And then there is such a struggle, and then he sends us challenges, hurdles, tests, whatever you call it, in our life here, where we are supposed actually to rectify the soul. The purpose of living here is to do mitzvahs and all that, like you said, like the book says, and to rectify the souls. But why not creating perfect souls to start with? It sounds like a little game that Hashem is playing with our dysfunctional souls, and then when we cannot rectify them here, we have to rectify them in Olam Haba. And it's like such a.
We're going to answer that question in lesson 5.
Okay.
And the short answer is that the soul was created perfect. That's the short answer. But if so, then what are we correcting? So we're going to go into that next week.
Okay. Thank you, Shavuot Tov.
Great question. Okay, Shavuot Tov. Good luck.